Hello friends, welcome to the next video in the series on risk management. In previous video we have seen about risk analysis, which is a part of risk assessment. Now in this second video we are going to see the next part of risk assessment, that is risk evaluation. So basically risk evaluation involves comparing estimated levels of risk against risk criteria to determine the significance of the risk and make decisions about risk treatment actions. So in most of the activities or in most of the cases, risk can be reduced by adding some further control measures or some treatment options. But typically this increases cost or may cause some inconvenience in the inbuilt process. Sometimes it is difficult to eliminate the risk without discontinuing the activity. First of all, we have to define the risk criteria, and this risk criteria are intended to guide decisions on these issues. What are the different criteria for risk or risk criteria are? First is criteria that define the level of risk that can be accepted in pursuit of objectives, sometimes known as risk appetite, and it is evaluated by risk benefit analysis or risk reward analysis. So basically this first criteria is to accept the risk as it is as compared to the benefit what we are going to get out of the process. The next criteria is criteria that determine whether further controls are needed, such as benefit to cost ratio. So here we are going to evaluate whether the benefit which we are going to get out of the treatment of the risk and the cost which is involved is beneficial or not. So here we will determine the control measures for the risk on the basis of benefit to cost ratio. So what cost or what investment we are going to do on these control measures, whether it is beneficial or not, that we are going to see in this second criteria. The next criteria is the criteria that decide between different risk management options, such as multiple criteria decision analysis. So it is the third criteria, it is the third risk criteria which can be used for evaluating the risk. So in this criteria we are going to do multiple criteria and multiple decisions we are going to take, and we are going to analyze the benefit of the risk evaluation or the risk elimination process. So this third criteria uses multiple decisions and multiple criteria to determine risk management option and how it will be beneficial. Now the next concept in the risk evaluation is the tolerability of the risk framework. So we have to classify or we have to define the tolerability of the risk. So first of all is the unacceptable risk, which is only permitted in the exceptional circumstances. The next is tolerable risk, which is to be kept as low as reasonably practical, taking into the account the cost and benefit of further risk reduction. Third is the broadly acceptable risk. So this risk is acceptable and which does not require any further reduction or further measurement for risk reduction. Now in this risk evaluation, first of all we are going to find out the risk acceptability criteria, and then we are going to see the risk evaluation process. So the risk acceptability criteria, the laboratory shall define and approve, document risk acceptability criteria for individual risk and the overall residual risk in the appropriate risk management plan. So basically the laboratory itself has to define its own policy that how much levels of risk or what are the risks which can be considered as acceptable, and depending upon that policy the laboratory has to prepare a document and they have to get it approved by the laboratory management for individual risk and the overall residual risk. so that acceptability criteria for risk get properly documented. These criteria for risk acceptability are essential for the effectiveness of the risk management process. Basically, once you have defined the risk acceptability criteria, then only you can define or you can decide whether the corrective actions or whether the treatment on the risk is required or not. So it is very important to define the risk acceptability criteria. Now this risk acceptability criteria can be determined according to the laboratory's policy for determining the risk acceptability criteria. It can be based on applicable national or regional regulations, applicable safety standards, and relevant medical practice standards. It should also take into account the generally accepted state of the art and known stakeholders' concern. And finally, it should be approved by the laboratory director. These criteria can differ based on the intended use or any other factor or as per the laboratory's own procedure. While considering the establishing risk acceptability criteria, compliance with required regulations such as national quality regulations, laboratory accreditations to standards for quality and competence, participation in recognized proficiency testing schemes must be considered. Now the next activity here in risk assessment or risk evaluation is the actual risk evaluation process. For each identified hazardous situation or hazards in the laboratory must approve the risk acceptability criteria to decide if the risk reduction is required or not. So the laboratory itself has to compare the risk along with the risk acceptability criteria, and the laboratory has to decide whether any further measures are required for risk reduction. So now how to perform the risk evaluation? So basically for this purpose, the laboratory must consider the risk probability number or RPN number, which derives a score for each operation or for each process and the product of three individual components, which includes severity of the risk, probability of the risk, and the detectability of the risk. So the overall composite score of this RPN, that is risk priority number, can be used to evaluate whether the risk is mild, moderate, severe or catastrophic, and how it should be classified, and whether any further measures are required to correct this process. The risk priority numbers provides a relative priority for taking actions. Bigger the RPN, it is the more important to address the corresponding failure, and this number should be used for prioritizing the risk and taking actions for the more important processes. So the RPN, that is risk priority number, if it is higher, you need to prioritize that process for risk elimination or treatment of the risk. Now this risk probability number has three variables. First is the severity of the risk, second is the probability of the risk, and third is the detectability of the risk. Now here I have described the probability of the risk in terms of qualitative variable, where level 5 risk means a frequent incidence and is likely to occur regularly, with the examination process expected to be experienced continuously in the laboratory. Level 4 implies reasonably likely probability and likely to occur multiple times within the examination procedure, expected to be experienced frequently in the laboratory. Level 3 is the occasional risk and likely to occur sometimes with the examination procedure, expected to be experienced several times in the laboratory. Level 2 is the remote possibility or remote probability, unlikely to occur but possible with the examination procedure and expected to be experienced only a few times in the laboratory. And level 1 probability or least probability is unlikely and it is extremely unlikely to occur, while the examination procedure and expected to be experienced only once or twice in the laboratory. Now the probability of harm can also be measured on semi-quantitative scales, where level 5 implies frequent and it can occur every day or each day. Level 4 is reasonably likely, which can occur each week or every week. Level 3 is occasional probability, which implies it can occur each month or every month. Level 2 is a remote possibility, which means it can occur each year or every year or once in a year. And level 1 is very unlikely, which also implies the probability is very less or can occur less than once a year. So this scale determines the level of the probability of occurring the risk. Now the next table or the next scale is the severity of harm scale, or severity of the harm which can be caused by the risk involved. So here again the scores are given from 5 to 1, 5 being very critical, which can be life threatening or injurious to health. Score of 4 means is a serious event which can cause permanent or irreversible bodily damage or impairment. Score 3, which is significant and cause non-permanent bodily damage or impairment, reversible with medical intervention. Score of 2 implies marginal severity, which can cause temporary bodily damage or impairment, reversible with no medical intervention. And score of 1 implies a severity is very negligible or temporary discomfort or inconsequential injuries can have occur. So this is the scale which defines the severity of harm on the scale of 5 to 1. The next scale, here we are going to see the detectability of the risk. So what is the probability of detecting the risk in the process itself? So this is also score on the scale of 1 to 9, 1 being high degree of detectability, so the incidence or the risk can be detected very easily and it is validated with automatic detection system, that is direct measure of failure, or 2 or more manual operated validation detection system, which can be direct or indirect. The score of 3 implies good detectability and a single manually operated validated detection system, that is a direct measure of failure. A score of 5 implies likely to detect, means there is a chance to get the risk can be detected. It is a single manually operated validated detection system, that is not a direct measure of failure. Next is a score of 7, which implies a fair detectability and involves a non-validated detection system, can be manual or automated simply via visual inspections or visual inspections of vessels. A score of 9 describes as a low or no detectability. In such cases, the risk may go undetected and the system may not be able to detect the failure. So this RPN, that is risk probability number calculation scoring system, will help to prioritize the risk and to take appropriate actions or treatment plan on the risk which are identified. So with this we are going to conclude this session on risk evaluation. Stay tuned for more sessions on risk management in clinical laboratory. Thank you.